It was an ugly day for weather. It was really, really ugly. Even for a Pegasus pony that lived, breathed, ate, and drank weather, it was a bad day to go outside. There were massive storm fronts converging all over Equestria. The map back at the library was a mess of converging storm fronts and storm cells. Rainbow Dash was already exhausted from her work, and the day wasn't even half over. She had been way out west over the massive Everfree fields, fighting whole lines of tornadoes. There weren't many ponies out in the Everfree fields, but every year the tornadoes claimed some of them, and today there had been more tornado spottings than in the last 5 years combined. Dash had seen her first F5 today. She never wanted to see another again. It was a monster of a thing, roaring, black and angry. It was a mile in diameter at its base. The sod it was tearing up would have torn her to pieces if she had tried to fly into it. All she could do with that one was to fly ahead of it and make sure no ponies were in its way. That had been earlier this morning. Now she was coming in for a fast landing in Ponyville. She had hoped for a bit of rest and lunch before heading out on her next sortie. Twilight was coming out to meet her. She looked worried. "It's Bidon Rouge!" Twilight shouted over the wind and rain. "Storm surge! 40 hooves high! Spike just gave me the message. The levees are holding for now, but if they fall—" "Right!" Dash shouted back with a grin. Only her 2 front hooves had hit the ground before she took off again, cheerfully. No rest for the weary, she thought to herself. Ponies everywhere are going to remember me for this. "Dash, wait for me!" Rainbow Dash pretended she didn't hear. Today was no day for slowpokes. She was already out over the Everfree forest when she looked down. She could see little glimmers of light flickering through the leaves, keeping pace with her. Long-distance teleportation. Twilight was coming with her, after all. It would have taken a lot out of her, Dash thought. By the time they would make it to Bidon Rouge, that little unicorn would be even more exhausted than she was. She was glad to have her along, though. Rain pounded against her flight goggles. It was too heavy. She needed altitude. Dash flew up into the clouds. It got dark very fast. Higher, she thought. The gray disappeared, and everything turned to white. It positively glowed. Dash loved these moments of flying up through large clouds. It felt like she was flying through heaven itself. And then she was through. Blue sky above her, white blanket below. That's when she saw the system in front of her. 50,000 feet high if it was an inch. She could see it all the way on the other side of the equestrian mountain range. It was just pouring through the mountain passes, like a pony pouring cream. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. She would have to fly to the other side of the thing. There was no going around it. She was the only pony in Equestria who would be able to make the flight. There was too much lightning. Twilight had given her 2 pairs of magical horseshoes, made of the same stuff as Twilight's magic lightning rod back at the treehouse. Dash could take a whole full-sized lightning bolt in flight, no need to be grounded. Dash had already taken 3 bolts that morning. They hurt like hell, but she had otherwise been uninjured. If it hadn't been for the horseshoes, she'd have been vaporized. They would have needed to use feather records to identify what was left of her. And then she was in soup. She was instantly buffeted by the winds. She was hit with rain, hail, sleet, snow, freezing rain, and things she had never seen before. Each blast of air was colder than the last. She was tossed around by updrafts, downdrafts, and wind shear. There were massive bolts of lightning, far bigger than she had ever known possible. She didn't think even the magic horseshoes would keep her safe from those. This wasn't a puny little F5 tornado. This was a fully grown cyclone. She didn't have a chance at stopping this on her own. All the Pegasi in Equestria couldn't stop this thing. Maybe she could change it, she thought. Maybe she could get it to blow in another direction, away from anywhere it could do harm. Maybe she could turn it inward on itself, make it stall, make it blow itself out. That's when she heard the sound. She couldn't believe she was hearing anything at this altitude, but it was there and growing louder. It was a roar, like a fully grown dragon, amplified by the hoof falls of 1,000 stampeding earth ponies. Mountains, she thought to herself. It must be mountains. 120-mile-per-hour winds blasting over a mountain summit. Only thing it could be. Rainbow Dash spotted the peak through the clouds. It was a rocky crag. There was a pony standing on top of it. What? Oh, Twilight. Her friend had been able to keep pace with her this whole way after all. Dash's confidence was renewed. Between her flying and Twilight's magic, maybe they could beat this storm. Twilight was shouting something, inaudible.
What?
South! Fly south! There's a convergence storm just 2 miles south of this peak. It's the key to this whole system. Disrupt it and the storm falls apart. Dash nodded. They were going to do it, the two of them. She had never been more excited. She took off to the south as fast as she could. She was bucking and kicking, hewing her way through the storm. There was a flash and a bang behind her, simultaneous, right on top of each other. Right on top of her. It hit her right in the center of her back, between her wings. Sharp pain radiated out through her whole body. She was falling. She spun as she fell. It was a hard spin, the hardest she had ever known. She needed to get out of it, and fast. She flapped her wings as hard as she could, just like she knew she should, to get out of a spin. It wasn't working. She only spun faster. She got a good look at her left wing. It was hurt real bad and bleeding. She had lost a good deal of her primary feathers. Some had been burned off by the lightning, others just ripped off by the force of it. She tried to turn her neck to see her other wing, but the centripetal force was massive. She couldn't see her own wing. She fell and fell. She'd have 1.5 minutes at her starting altitude, give or take. How much was left? She had to get out of the spin. She spied something through the clouds, an object falling with her. It was hard to see because she was spinning so fast. Another Pegasus pony? Would she be rescued? No, it wasn't a Pegasus pony. It was a wing. A single wing falling with a bloody stump. It was her own wing, torn from her body. Rainbow Dash didn't scream. In real life, ponies don't scream when they fall, not like in the stories. She had time to think, but nothing to think about. She expected her life to flash before her eyes. It didn't. She expected to go through that cycle of denial, bargaining, and acceptance, thinking that maybe some soft object would break her fall, even though she knew that was impossible. She didn't think of that either. She didn't think about anything as she fell. And then she did think of something. Twilight. Twilight was still out in the storm. Her life was in danger. In her last moment, Rainbow Dash wished for her friend to be okay, wished for her to make it home safe. It was a fine day for weather at the memorial service. The storm had blown for 3 more days before dying of its own accord. Every pony in Ponyville had come out for the service. Losing a pony so young was a tragic event in Ponyville. It rarely ever happened. By rights, the mayor should have given the eulogy, but she deferred instead to Twilight Sparkle. Twilight gave a beautiful speech. She spoke about what a great tragedy it was to lose Dash, how Ponyville would never be the same. But she also talked about what a joy it was to have known her, how her life should be celebrated. Dash had been a hero that day. Hundreds, maybe thousands of ponies had been saved thanks to her sacrifice. Every pony was moved by Twilight's words. Then Twilight called for a moment of silence. A beautiful silence followed. There were sounds, but they were soft sounds. They were birds singing in the trees, and Fluttershy trying to control her weeping. No pony minded. Then another sound emerged, off on the horizon. It had started as a rumble and then grew into a roar, like a fully grown dragon amplified by the hoof-falls of 1,000 charging earth ponies. The Wonderbolts, in formation, flew in low and fast. Then they burst into a display over the service, spreading out like the petals of a flower. It was a 6-pony formation, but only 5 Wonderbolts flew today. One position was empty. There, in the middle, just off-center. This position was empty on purpose. This was the missing pony formation. It was the highest honor the Wonderbolts had for any pony. It symbolized the loss of a friend. That night, Princess Celestia stepped down from her tall throne. She left her throne room and entered one of her personal chambers, the one she used for private business. It was darker than the throne room and circular. Between the black marble columns along the walls were windows where she could look out on her land. A 20-ton skull of a dragon king hung on iron chains from the ceiling. She was expecting a very important report from her most faithful student. This may be the most important report yet. At the specified time, there was a flash and a bang behind her, resounding simultaneously. Celestia turned. Twilight had teleported in, and was bowing before her. Your Majesty, Twilight Sparkle, my most faithful student, you don't appear to have grown since last I saw you, but your aura, oh Twilight, it's much more powerful than it was before. Twice as powerful, Your Majesty. I've acquired the element of loyalty. I've done it. Then the severing of the element. Total betrayal, Your Majesty, the antithesis of loyalty. She never suspected a thing. Excellent. That's important. Take your time. Take things slowly. Years. The years won't matter once you've acquired them all. The other ponies must not suspect a thing. It was a beautiful day for weather. Early spring had come to Ponyville. The winter had been cleaned up and pushed aside for weeks now. The countryside was simply bursting with new growth. It was also foaling season in Equestria. Apple Rush had picked the perfect time to deliver her first foal. Twilight Sparkle stepped through the front gate of Sweet Apple Acres. It had been a while since she had been out this way. The whole extended family had come by for the blessed event. Here was Granny Smith, absolutely beaming. She had mid-married every living soul in the Apple family, and now she'd be bringing in the newest generation. She had never been prouder. Big Macintosh was running the farm while his little sister was busy. He was a whirlwind of activity, pulling the plow, taking care of all the guests, lending support to the proud papa. Twilight had never seen him more upbeat and chatty. And here was Peanut, the proud papa himself. He looked more nauseated than proud. He was a bundle of nerves. Twilight couldn't blame him. This would be his first foal, too. They told Twilight that she could find Apple Rush over in the big red barn. It figured. The Apple family consisted of sticklers for tradition. Traditional foaling simply made sense. It was likely that every single one of them had been foaled in that barn, on a big, warm pile of fresh hay. She found Apple Rush outside, circling around the barn. "Well now, how are you doing, Sugar Cube? Boy, are you a sight for sore eyes. Glad you could make it. You couldn't keep me away, not on a big day like today." "Today? Now, don't get too excited, Twilight. I only just started contractions. Granny said this could take a while." "Did you pick a name yet?" "Oh, we did. We were thinking Jonah Dash, if it's a colt, and Rainbow Bloom, if it's a filly." "Aw, that's beautiful." "Thank you kindly. Listen, Twilight, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about. Oh! Apple Rush bent over. In ponies, and all equines for that matter, contractions were quite obvious. "Oh my gosh, do you need Granny? I can get Granny. Are you sure you're even supposed to be walking around? Cool your jets, Missy. This is just a little one. Granny told me I should be walking around. Helps the baby turn. Gets the right end pointed toward the birth canal, and that's a little too much information. I'm sorry, Sugar Cube. Sometimes I forget that not every pony was raised on a farm. Let's go back inside." They walked slowly back in. Apple Rush lay down in a pile of hay. "How's Spike been doing?" He's molding again. Getting big, is he?" "Like a weed. And he's costing me a fortune in gemstones doing it. I think he'll be moving out on his own pretty soon now." "You were going to tell me something outside?" "Oh, right. I guess I don't really know how to say it. I miss you. You and the other fillies. We used to see so much of each other. It's like we hardly get to see each other, to have fun like we used to." "You mean since Rainbow Dash died?" Apple Rush thought for a moment. "That too, I suppose. But that was years ago now. I was thinking more since I got married. Now, all my time in the world is divided between running this here farm and Peanut. I ain't got time for myself. Don't get me wrong or nothing. Peanut's a good husband, and I'm sure he'll make a good daddy. But once the baby comes, I don't know how I'll do it. Big Macintosh means well, but he doesn't know nothing about keeping the books. And Granny Smith's getting old. She's really slowing down, Twilight. Apple Bloom's always running around with those crazy friends of hers, getting into who knows what kind of trouble. How am I supposed to do everything? How can I do all this and take care of a baby at the same time? What kind of mother will I be? I feel so alone." Her eyes began to well up. Apple Rush. The mare's married name still felt awkward on her tongue. Twilight reverted to her filly name, as she had known the pony in her youth. Applejack. There's no need to worry about anything. There has never been a more prepared mare in the entire history of Equestria. Your whole family is here to help you." Applejack cleared her throat. "Look at Big Macintosh. Big Uncle Macintosh. He's a rock. I've seen that pony pull up stumps like they were weeds." Applejack started to smile. "And Granny Smith. She's done this 1,000,000 times before. She'll probably be delivering your grandfolks, too." Applejack was grinning now. "Applebloom, oh Applebloom, can't you just imagine what kind of auntie that wild pony's going to be? You better look out for her. Listen, I'm telling you, you've got nothing to worry about, Applejack. You've just got a case of postpartum depression." "Postpartum what?" "Postpartum depression, or I guess in this case, prepartum. It's just hormones. Everything is all sorted out. If there's any problem, I'll rustle together Pinky, Fluttershy, and Rarity. There's nothing we can't solve together. I've got the ear of the princess, too, you know. Listen, Applejack, you've got nothing to be frightened of." "Are you sure?" "Trust me." Twilight came out again the next day. Still no foal. The contractions were getting stronger, but Applerush wasn't even close to being fully dilated. It would be a while longer. Yet she was in good spirits. She had even gotten a few hours of sleep in the night. Peanut had gotten none. There was exhaustion added to his long, nauseated face now. Bags were under his eyes. He looked a wreck. Every in-law in the family kept making their rounds to cheer him up. Granny Smith was still cheerful. Always long labors in the Apple family, she told every pony who would listen. She rattled off a list of names and hours, each getting longer as she went back in time. Ponies from town were coming out to lend their support. Fluttershy was there. Rarity and Pinkie Pie had been out to visit earlier. Twilight asked Applerush if there was anything she could do for her. Twilight knew a number of spells that could do just about anything. Foaling was a simple business. Applejack thanked her, but no. She was going to have this baby the old-fashioned way, come hell or high water. Twilight didn't ask twice. She knew how her old friend thought. Still, a small spark leapt from Twilight's horn as she left the barn on the second day. No pony noticed. On Twilight's visit on the third day, the atmosphere had gotten more intense. Big Macintosh was a little frayed around the edges. He was starting to develop that same nervous look that poor Peanut had the entire time. Zecora was there, a practiced mid-mare in her own right. So was the nurse pony from Ponyville. It would have crushed Granny Smith's pride to have called for help, but if it did, she didn't show it. The nurse pony was trained with all the latest medicines. Granny was telling every pony that nothing was too good for her granddaughter. The nurse was cold, professional. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had total control of the situation. This foal was coming today, no doubt about it. If it wasn't going to do it on its own, they'd have the doctor pony come out and take it out. They weren't going to wait another day. That night, or more likely early the next morning, Twilight awoke to the sound of furious pounding and shouting at the library's front door. It was time. She got up, stretched, and calmly walked downstairs. Spike had already gotten up and answered the door. He moved his bulk aside to let the panicked Applebloom rush through the door. "Twilight, come quick! You've got to use your magic! The doctor's been out all night, but he don't know what to do. The baby's in trouble. It got choked up on the cord and its heart almost stopped. The doctor had to bring in Peanut and Big Mac in the barn to turn Applerush over. That got the baby's heart working right again, but they're still in big trouble. You've got to come quick. You've got to come right now." Twilight made a show of looking nervous. She made a show of getting books of magic off the shelf and stuffing them into her saddlebags. She looked back at the worried faces of Applebloom and Spike. With a flash and a bang, she teleported herself out to Sweet Apple Acres. She saw Peanut and Big Mac. There was no other way to put it. They were standing guard in front of the barn. They had rallied themselves and were now fully alert, standing like two of Celestia's palace guards, ready to do whatever it took to save their wife and sister. All she asked them to do was make sure no pony came in after her. This would be powerful magic, and she could afford no distractions. She went into the barn and closed the door behind her. A flight of dragons wouldn't be able to interrupt her work now, not with those two out front. She sat down next to Applerush. She looked a mess. She was shivering uncontrollably. Twilight knew that was expected. It was due to a combination of hormones and the drugs the doctor had given her. Twilight had studied the entire process. She was determined to make it work properly.
Twilight? Oh, Twilight. Thank you for coming, Sugar Cube. I'm sorry for earlier. I'm sorry I didn't ask for magic.
Hush. You've got nothing to worry about. It's not too late. I've got spells that can take care of this. They can take care of anything. You're going to be safe. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of the baby, too.
You promise?
Trust me. Twilight began to work her magic. She could sense Applerush's heartbeat, the blood flowing through her veins. She could feel the baby's, too. It was small and weak, but there was a force behind it, powerful. This foal wanted to be born. Then Twilight began to take control of these forces, to manipulate them. Lower the pulse, lower the blood pressure. Applerush's eyes opened wide, and then rolled back into her head, showing only the whites. Lower the pulse, lower the blood pressure. Applerush slipped into darkness, losing consciousness. Take your time, Twilight thought to herself. Pace yourself. Lower the pulse, lower the blood pressure. Applerush was dead. A great wave of magic rolled over Twilight. She had acquired the element of trust. It washed over her, adding its power to her own. But it wasn't complete. There was something missing. Its absence cried out. The severing of the element wasn't complete. There was some last promise still being kept. Almost as an afterthought, Rainbow Bloom was born a minute later. It was as healthy as any newborn foal could be. All she needed to do was take her first breath, sever the umbilicus, remove the caul, clear the mucus out from her tiny mouth and nose, and she'd breathe freely. Twilight placed her hoof over the tiny mouth and nose instead. She waited a minute. 2. She occasionally let a small spark or flare from her horn to make sure that it looked from the outside as if work were being done. Then the last of the element came over her, adding its aura to hers. The severing was complete, her work done. She got up and went outside to tell the family. They were all there, standing, waiting in front of the barn. She told Peanut first. He had no reaction except to close his eyes and slump to the ground. Big Macintosh had heard what she had told Peanut. His reaction was the opposite. He broke down completely. He tore away from the family, kicking and rearing, smashing into wagons and barrels. Splinters flew in all directions. 3 stallions from the extended family went off to try to corral him. They had their work cut out for them. Twilight went down the line of family to extend her condolences. Granny Smith was bawling, but she kept trying to thank Twilight for coming out and trying anyway. Apple Bloom was crying in Spike's arms. They had just made it back out from Ponyville for the conclusion. She continued down the line. Each family member's heart was broken by the tragedy, but they each felt a small amount of comfort from Twilight's kind words. Red Gala, Red Delicious, Apple Fritter, Apple Bumpkin, Apple Strudel, Apple Tart, Baked Apple, Apple Brioche, Apple Brown Betty, Apple Cinnamon Crisp. With that done, Twilight headed back to her library in Ponyville. She needed to get back to bed. She had already lost enough sleep as it was. She had important business tonight in Canterlot.
So the severing was complete, my student?
It was, Your Majesty. She trusted me completely, right until the very end, even more than doctors or nurses or her own grandmother.
Excellent. That would have been very difficult to accomplish.
Ah, your training in the nature of friendship has served you well.
It has, Your Majesty, and I thank you for that. When I was younger, I didn't understand why you sent me to learn those lessons. Now I understand, and I will be forever thankful.
Princess Celestia ignored the praise.
I'm beginning to see sense in your strategy, Twilight Sparkle. You've taken out the 2 strongest ponies first.
Indeed, Your Majesty.
Still, it won't get easier from here. It will likely only get harder. You must remember, they must never suspect a thing. Again, take your time. Years if you have to. The elements must be severed properly. Completely.
Yes, Your Majesty. I've got everything all planned ahead. Twilight had invited Pinkie Pie over for a tea party. They hadn't seen each other for some time. Twilight had moved out of Ponyville some years ago, out to the Everfree Forest. She had renovated one of the towers in the old crumbling palace to suit her needs. There was plenty of space out there and no ponies to bother her. She had never liked other ponies bothering her. Her old library simply wasn't large enough to house all her books and supplies, even after Spike had moved out. He was off in Dragonland or somewhere else, being a nuisance to some pony else. Inviting Pinkie, Twilight thought to herself, was a perfect plan. Pinkie could charge right through the woods without a single worry. No other pony in Ponyville could do that. There wouldn't be any pony following her. It would just be her and Pinkie this afternoon. She could do what she had to do, and no one would ever know. Pinkie's strength, like the others, would be her undoing. The force of laughter, Twilight continued to think to herself, was a powerful force, as far as such things were concerned. It was arguably the strongest of the elements of harmony. Every pony always had laughter, no matter how much anything else could be taken away from them. Hobos laugh when they have nothing else. Tyrants laugh when they see their empires crumbling before them. Laugh in the face of death, ponies say. Laugh in the face of God. The sound of tuneless singing began to emerge from between the trees. Bugs, a small flock of birds, and several mammals flew out and away from the commotion. Pinkie Pie bounded happily into the forest clearing.
"Oh, hi, Twilight. Glad to see you. Is this where we're having tea?"
The clearing was perhaps halfway between Twilight's Tower and Ponyville. It was not where they were having tea. Pinkie had aged noticeably over the last few years. They both had. There was gray showing in both their manes. Pinkie, however, had filled out a bit. All those sweets and pastries were finally catching up to her. Having 3 foals of her own probably contributed as well. It suited her personality. She was more bouncy.
Actually, Pinkie, I invited you out here because I wanted to talk to you.
Oh, what about, silly?
Well, do you remember the first day we met, when we all came out here to the Everfree Forest?
Oh, I sure do, Twilight. That was the time we met that flamboyant sea serpent. Then Fluttershy beat up that manticore. Then we met Sakura and her evil voodoo curses.
Pinkie?
And all the parasprites ate up Ponyville and...
Pinkie?
And we fought that evil necromancer and taught him the magic of friendship through song and dance. Pinkie Pie!
Oh, it was the time we fought Nightmare Moon, Pinkie. We all received the elements of harmony.
Oh, I remember now. I got that pretty necklace, and you got that pretty crown. Wait, were those important? Were we ever supposed to use those things again or something?
Not you, Pinkie Pie, but I'm collecting them.
Oh? Well, you can have mine, I guess. I'm not using it. Why do you want it anyway?
Are you familiar with the term apotheosis?
It's a noun, silly. The exaltation or elevation of a pony to godhood. Or, more simply, the ideal form of a thing, its epitome or quintessence. Would you like the origin?
Pinkie blinked a few times, smiling. I mean to have yours, Pinkie. I've already taken Rainbow Dash and Applejack's elements, and soon I'll add yours.
Oh, did they leave theirs to you?
No, Pinkie Pie, you don't understand. A pony can't just give away their element. It's a part of them. It has to be taken with force. I killed Rainbow Dash and AJ. I stole their elements.
This isn't funny, Twilight.
No, I agree, it isn't funny. This work is very important to me. I've worked very hard at this. I wouldn't joke about it.
Besides, Rainbow Dash crashed in that storm, and Apple Rush died while foaling. Poor things.
I know, Pinkie. I was in that storm. I was the one that struck Dash down. I was there in that barn, the last to see Applejack before she died. You really think I couldn't pull off a simple foaling with my magic?
So you just kill ponies and take their elements? I'm not getting any of this.
No, Pinkie. I can't just kill you all. If I could, I'd have killed you all that first night. I'm the right hoof of Celestia. None of you are any match for me.
You're being mean.
I know, Pinkie, and I'm sorry. I don't want to be mean. I really don't want to be doing any of this. It's just something that has to be done. None of it is personal. Look, it's not just a matter of killing ponies. You ponies are the paragons of the elements that you represent. The elements have to be properly severed from the ponies before I can take them. Rainbow Dash represented loyalty. I severed the element of loyalty by stabbing her in the back, proverbially. I suppose it is sort of literal as well. Apple Rush represented trust and integrity. She entrusted me with her own life and the life of her foal. That's the most trust you can give any pony. And I broke both those promises. That's how elements are severed, Pinky, with the complete antithesis of their respective elements. Now, Pinky, do you know what the opposite of laughter is?
Ooh!
This was a much funner game than the last one. She didn't like that last one at all.
Is it burping? Oh, how about sneezing? Oh, farting. Is it farting?
Horror, Pinky. The opposite of laughter, or humor, or joviality, or whatever you want to call it. In order to take your element, I need to horrify you before I kill you. That's why I'm telling you this. This is all the truth, not a game. I've killed Apple Rush and Rainbow Dash. I'm going to kill Rarity and Fluttershy. But not before I kill you.
You're not going to make me scared, Twilight. I don't get scared.
I know, Pinky. You're a very tough nut to crack. That's why I had to wait all these years. I had to wait until there was something you cared about more than anything else in the world. The safety of your 3 little foals, for instance.
Twinkie, Blinky, and Stinky? They're back at the Sugar Cube corner. Mrs. Cake is watching them for me. They're safe. You can't touch them, silly.
I know they're back at the cakes. You always leave them there, Pinky. And I don't need to physically be there to touch them. Listen, do you know what legerdemain is? Cantrips? Do you remember when Trixie came to town?
Was she the griffin?
Twilight raised her hoof to her face. This conversation wasn't at all going the way she had hoped. She was the blue unicorn that came to town to put on a magic show. That's what cantrips are, Pinky. Little easy spells that put on a show. They can make sparks, move ropes, create cartoony Ursa Minors. They're not just visual, Pinky. They can change odors. They can make natural gas smell like freshly baked muffins, for example.
Gas?
She was beginning to put the pieces together.
The cakes just had new gas ovens installed.
I know, Pinky. 4 months ago. There's a leak in one of the valves. I just put it there myself.
That does it, sister. This game isn't funny anymore. It never was funny. It's not even fun. In fact, I don't think I want you as my friend anymore either. Not when you act like this. There's something wrong with you, living out here by yourself. It's gotten to your head. You've become a real creepy weirdo creep, Twilight. And if you want to come back and apologize, I'll be around. But until then, we're just through. Goodbye.
Pinky turned and walked back into the woods, leaving Twilight in the clearing. The woods seemed darker than they had been before. There was a song she used to sing a long time ago with her grandmother. How did it go? She couldn't remember the melody. That was strange. She never forgot a song. Laugh at the ghostly? No. Guffaw at the creepy? No. Her pace quickened through the forest. She was getting nervous. That was strange. She never got nervous. Why was Twilight acting so unusual? That pony was always an awkward one, never really fit in with other ponies. But what she had said today was totally maladjusted. It was so unlike her. What if she was telling the truth? Her pace quickened again. She was scared now. Which was strange, because she never got scared. What if Twilight did kill those other ponies? What if she had gone insane? What if she had been plotting all along? That would mean she was in danger. That would mean her foals and Mrs. Cake were in danger. She was in full gallop by the time she got back to Ponyville. Tears were streaming from her eyes. She was shaking in fear. There, Sugar Cube Corner. It was intact. It was still standing. No fire, no explosion. Mrs. Cake and her 3 foals were in the kitchen, baking a batch of chocolate chip cookies. They were as happy and as cheerful as always. Twilight had lied to her. Twilight had been lying to her. Had she been pranked? Had Twilight done the impossible and pranked the Master? Not just a little prank, but a super-duper mega-awesome pull-no-punches pranky prank. Pinkie Pie began to laugh to herself. Of course that was it, you silly filly, Pinkie Pie thought to herself. That was when she noticed it. She stared off in a random direction, 1,000-yard stare. Mrs. Cake and the foals were baking chocolate chip cookies. Yet the shop was filled with the smell of gingerbread. A strong, overpowering
nauseating smell of baking gingerbread. Pinkie Pie had just enough time to contort her face into a look of unimaginable horror. Twilight touched off a spark from afar.
Do you mean you disobeyed my direct order and told this pony everything? Answer me!
I told her the truth, the whole and horrifying truth. Is there anything more horrifying from her perspective than my plot against them, Your Majesty?
Did she tell any pony?
No, Your Majesty, no. I followed her all the way to her sweet shop, right up to the edge of town. She didn't stop to talk to a soul. She could have spoken to ponies once inside. Yes, Your Majesty, but they wouldn't have survived the explosion. No pony within a 2-block radius survived.
Collateral damage?
No damage to infrastructure, Your Majesty. Not unless you consider a sweet shop to be infrastructure. All neighboring buildings were residences.
Incidental casualties?
A few, Your Majesty. Nothing a town like Ponyville can't absorb without long-term consequences.
Celestia sat thinking, mollified.
You had done well, my faithful student. Daring, cunning, originality, improvisation. These aren't elements of harmony, but they are all things you'll need to learn before you come to power. Twilight blushed. You're getting close now. We're both getting close. The end is in sight, and it's downhill from here. But don't get overconfident. If either of the surviving ponies discovers us, it could risk a clean severing. All your work would be for naught. You don't want to come all this way, spend all these years plotting, and have your plan foiled by a careless mistake. Yes, Your Majesty. Twilight bowed again. Rarity rubbed her weary eyes. She got up from her desk to stretch. Her joints ached and popped. She was becoming an old pony. She knew she didn't look it on the outside, but she certainly felt it on the inside. It had gotten dark outside while she was doing the paperwork. It had grown cold in the dusty, old cobwebbed boutique. The boutique, her old safety net. She had just moved back to Ponyville. It had been her triumphant return, or maybe her exile. She had formerly run a successful model agency in Canterlot, emphasis on the past tense. It had gone under. So had the fashion line. That wasn't entirely a bad thing. With the fast-paced world of Canterlot, even the most successful agencies go under in 4 years, perhaps 6 if they're lucky. Hers had lasted 15. Her clothes and models had been on every magazine cover all over Equestria. She had been the leading figure in fashion for an entire generation. The hoi polloi ponies back in Canterlot would be talking about her legacy for years. Still, it was hard to see the businesses go. It hurt the most because she hadn't even been unsuccessful. Ponies were still wearing her latest outfits. It's just that the businesses had been hemorrhaging money. There was some kind of accounting problem. It just didn't add up, quite literally. That's what she had been doing this evening, going back over the books for the umpteenth time. Nothing made sense. It was like some dark curse had just fallen over all her successful businesses. Oh well, she thought to herself. This is why she kept the deed to the old Ponyville place, just for such an emergency. It would be like an early retirement, dignified. Besides, these small-town country folk could really use her help. She stretched again, grumbling to herself, and put the last of the books away. Now she had personal time to spend on what was really important to her. Over the years, she had been collecting old used clothes, vests, boots, saddles, blankets, and the like. She had been storing them here in her old boutique. All the back rooms and the entire upper floor were filled up to the rafters with old throwaways. There were ponies in the big city of Canterlot that could barely afford their own clothes. Even little poor foals were going to school in old rags and mismatched rusty horseshoes. These clothes would be for all the poor people of Canterlot. She was going to donate them. But she wasn't just going to turn them over. She was going to use her magic to restore them. She would patch the holes, fix the buttons, replace the sequins, remove the stains, and restore the colors. She wasn't going to stop there. If they were brought back to just like new, why not make them better than new? She was going to redesign them, really spruce them up. Not only were the little poor foals of Canterlot going to go to school feeling warm and comfortable, they were really going to put those snooty rich foals in their place. They'd be jealous. Rarity couldn't wait to get started. It was in one of these spare rooms that the fire started. Ponies later would think that it was a disaster waiting to happen. Rooms like that filled with dry old cloth. It was highly flammable. But then again, they'd say to themselves, that didn't really make sense. If there were only old clothes in those rooms, what was the point of ignition? Rarity made 2 mistakes when the fire started, both understandable. They were easy mistakes to make. The first mistake was trying to put the fire out. There was nothing in the old boutique worth an untrained pony risking herself to try to put out the fire. But it started as a small fire, and it's only natural for any pony to think they can put out just a small fire. She stamped with her hooves. She threw old horse blankets over the fire to smother it. She ran repeatedly out to the Ponyville well to grab a bucket of water and then back in again. A crowd began to form, but no pony had the wherewithal to help her, or to stop her from going back in. The second mistake was that she was initially successful. The stamping hooves had put out the embers. The horse blankets successfully smothered the flames. The buckets of water squelched the fire with a hiss of steam. This was a mistake, because it gave her the illusion of accomplishment. She had made progress putting out the blaze at its initial source, but she didn't notice the flames spreading around her. More embers were born. The blankets began to smolder around the edges. Flames spread out as she ran for more water. It was her mane that caught first. The flames nearly reached her scalp before she noticed. Her tail had caught before then. By the time she reached the front door, spots of fire ignited on her coat. She was fully engulfed by the time she ran past the bystanders that had gathered out front. They lunged for her, but she was too fast. She ran and ran and ran. Some fast-thinking ponies were running after her, trying to tackle her, but she was too fast. She ran for 8 full blocks. The wind only fanned the fire into one great flame that stretched behind her 4 times her own length, like the tail of a horrible comet. Rarity finally collapsed on her own accord, her pursuers leaping on top of her, smothering the flames. Twilight Sparkle waited 3 days before growing impatient. Rarity should have died by then. She shouldn't have survived the first night. For being the paragon of generosity, Rarity was certainly being stubborn and yielding her element. Twilight decided to pay her a personal visit. Ponyville had its own hospital these days, built next to the site of the old urgent care clinic. Twilight stepped in silently, invisible to the nurses and orderlies and patients and their families. She was more mist now than Pony. This was old magic, but she had become a powerful sorceress. She made her way into the burn ward. There was only one patient there. Other ponies had been burned as they tackled her, but their burns were superficial. They had all gone home by the next day. Twilight reincorporated herself. The room stunk. It was replete with the smell of burnt hair. It would take a team of ponies to wash the stench out after Rarity finally expired. As she stepped closer to the stricken mare, she noticed another smell, more disgusting. It was putrescence. Twilight could smell Rarity's infection from afar. Twilight, over her long years, had studied all manner of death and torture. Burns, by far, were the worst way to die. It was the only thing Twilight was still afraid of. The pain of even 2nd-degree burns was horrifying. 3rd-degree burns were all the worse. The pain didn't stop after the fire was extinguished. The pain continued. Always. Twilight honestly didn't know how Rarity had survived this, although the infection itself would probably take her by morning. Twilight examined Rarity on her bed. The pony had suffered 3rd-degree burns all over, well, over every single square inch that Twilight could see. Some of her was covered in bandages, others exposed to air. There wasn't a single hair over her entire body, or skin for that matter. Her very flesh was exposed. Fat. There was charred meat and festering scabs. Even Twilight was taken aback by the monstrosity before her. Rarity stirred. She opened her eyes, those deep blue eyes, and stared directly into Twilight's soul. Twilight hadn't expected that. Twilight had expected gaping ruined holes where Rarity's eyes had been. Rarity struggled. A gasping, gurgling noise escaped from her throat. Rarity was trying to speak, but she couldn't. Smoke inhalation, Twilight thought, and more burns. Superheated gas must have charred her vocal cords as badly as the rest of her. Twilight could fix that. She had a simple spell for it. Rarity obviously didn't know it, nor did any of the medical unicorns in the hospital, or unicorns in all of Ponyville for that matter. Rarity would be talking now, if not for their ignorance. Twilight cast her spell.
You! I knew it was you all along!
For the first time since she had come to Ponyville, Twilight Sparkle felt fear. She panicked. How could Rarity know her plans? She had been so careful, so precise. She had made everything look natural. Rainbow Dash had been reckless. She couldn't go a week without flying into a tree or a tornado. Her death was tragic at such a young age, but it should have surprised no one. Apple Rush, Applejack, whatever. Twilight admitted to herself that her death was unusual. Falling deaths were rare, not unheard of, but rare. Twilight had only taken that risk because it presented the perfect opportunity to sever the element of honesty. Pinkie Pie? She had been the opposite. That pony's fate was sealed the moment the Cakes had installed a gas line. No, Twilight thought to herself. Rarity didn't know everything. Rarity was bluffing. Rarity was paranoid. Rarity had gone insane with all the pain, and was lashing out at her own friend. Twilight decided to call the bluff.
So you know it was I who started the fire.
Yes!
And you know I destroyed your boutique, and all those clothes you had intended for the poor or the orphans or the lepers or whatever it was you intended.
Yes, I know that too.
Twilight upped the ante.
And I suppose you know that I was the one cooking your books.
Twilight looked over Rarity's body and then returned to looking into her eyes.
I'm sorry, no pun intended.
The gaze in Rarity's eyes revealed to Twilight that Rarity hadn't known everything. Twilight was comfortable again.
Oh? Then I guess you don't know that I've also taken your reputation. You know the Canterlot elite. Do you really think they'll be saying, "Oh, there went Rarity, the greatest fashion diva in all the history of Equestria"? No. They'll be saying, "Rarity? Rarity who? Rarity? I think I remember her, but what's she got out this season? Rarity? Oh, I remember her. She was that country bumpkin who got herself killed when her shack burned down."
Rarity's eyes quivered with rage.
You took everything from me.
Twilight smiled. She leaned over the bed. She stretched her long neck down so she could whisper into what was left of Rarity's disfigured ear.
Yes, but I really only wanted your element.
Rarity recoiled, or at least she tried to recoil. The motion was pathetic in the condition that she was in. It looked like she was trying to crawl out of her own... well, skin wasn't the right word for it, not anymore.
Fluttershy! I'll tell Fluttershy! She'll stop you! She can stop anything! She can stop dragons!
Oh, Rarity, Twilight laughed. Don't be ridiculous. You won't tell Fluttershy. You won't be telling any pony.
Twilight removed the spell she had cast earlier and stepped out of the burn ward. A hideous sound followed her, a disgusting gurgling sound. Rarity was trying to scream. Twilight Sparkle visited Princess Celestia the next afternoon, after the element of generosity had added its aura to her own.
"You're certain she never suspected the truth?" "Positive, Your Majesty," Twilight lied. "Everything went off exactly as I planned, except for the time it took for her to die of her burns. I took everything that she had in this world. Except her pain, of course. I left her that." "You're very near your goal now, Twilight." "Yes, Your Majesty. You know, I think it's time to drop the formalities. You've been my faithful student for so many long years, and you've been my closest confidant almost as long now. Even closer than my own sister, and soon you'll be my equal in power." "Thank you, Celestia." Twilight rose to her hooves. "I'm honored. There's one last thing that worries me." "Oh?" "A minor hurdle in your plan. You took out the 2 strongest ponies first. That was clever. But the last one, the one that holds the element of kindness, that will require cruelty. Any pony who seeks power can lie and betray. Any pony who seeks power can strike fear in her enemies. But cruelty, that takes a special kind of talent. Even monsters struggle to be cruel. Are you certain you're up to the task?
I am, Celestia.
Twilight grinned.
Cruelty won't be a problem. Nothing can stop me now.
Twilight Sparkle took in the grisly scene before her. There was carnage on the lawn before Fluttershy's modest country home. There was hide and hair everywhere. Bits of bone and viscera were scattered across the grass. Blood saturated the ground. There were signs of torture if you looked close, if you knew what to look for. There had been cruelty here. Twilight sighed to herself. She had never really meant for any of this to be personal. She had honestly wanted to be friends with those ponies, if not for the problem of needing their elements. She hoped that on some other plane of existence, the dead ponies' souls could understand why she did all of these things. She hoped they would be happy for her accomplishments. She sighed again. There would be work to do now, much more work. She had to make new plans, schedules. Her carefully laid preparations had all come undone. Things needed to be salvaged, and with haste. Twilight teleported back to her restored castle in the Everfree Forest to think and scheme. She arrived in her courtyard. The crumbled granite cobblestones reflected the moonlight. The moon itself was waxing, nearly full. There was plenty of light despite the late hour. There was enough light to see the ponies standing on the other side of the courtyard. An old gray mare, much like herself. Her exceptionally long mane, which had once been a beautiful shade of pink, was now silvery white. Her frame was diminished by arthritis and old age.
"Fluttershy?"
Twilight called out, now realizing just how much jeopardy her plans were truly in.
"I suppose you've figured out my plans. I suppose you've come to my castle because you think you can somehow stop me."
Fluttershy opened her mouth but choked on the words. She looked down at her hooves, then looked up again. She stared Twilight Sparkle directly in the eyes.
"Yes. Then it must have been you that killed your own animals. Why? Can't you figure it out, Twilight? Don't you ever think about any pony's motives but your own? I did it to stop you. You might kill me tonight. You might take my element, but you won't take it cleanly. A proper severing is foiled. You won't gain full power. You'll never be Celestia's equal. And honestly, Twilight, I did it out of spite. You killed Rainbow Dash, and Applejack, and Pinkie Pie, and Rarity, and all those poor little babies. I did it to watch you squirm."
Twilight raged inside. She made an effort not to show it, but sparks flew from her horn. Cobblestones crumbled under her hooves. "No," she said to herself, "calm yourself. Think this through."
"Do you really think you can stop me now, Fluttershy? I might not get all of your element, but I'll still have all the elements, 5 of them, completely intact. I'll be more powerful than you could have ever guessed. Did you ever think about the other side? The freed elements haven't fixed themselves to your soul yet. I could just as easily kill you and take them for myself." "Fluttershy, please. You're only a little old Pegasus pony. You have no horn to focus magic. Even if you did, you wouldn't know anything about it. You've never studied magic." "Oh, but you're wrong, Twilight. I've been studying magic for years now. How do you think I know so much?"
Twilight's jaw dropped. She was stumped. How indeed? This pony must have an accomplice, somebody teaching her magic and pulling the strings. But who? There were only so many ponies in Equestria that could appreciate this level of magic, only so many who knew about the elements and what to—
"Luna!"
This time she made no effort to conceal the rage on her face. Fluttershy grinned.
"That's a good guess, Twilight, but you're wrong. Oh, sure, I've spoken with Luna. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. But you know how fickle friendship is. Luna and I have only had a passing interest in each other. We mostly just coordinated our schedules. Luna knew that Celestia would be distracted on the eve of her precious student's apotheosis. That coup, Twilight, the one that you and Celestia always suspected, but could never find evidence for? Well, look, Twilight. Look toward Canterlot."
Twilight looked in Canterlot's direction. She couldn't see it, of course. It was obscured by leagues of forest and stone and mountains. There was nothing to see there except flashes. They weren't flashes of light. There was no color, but they were flashes, explosions. Invisible, but still resonating at the back of Twilight Sparkle's eyes, waves of psychic energy. This was magic. There was a battle going on in Canterlot. A battle the likes of which Equestria hadn't seen in over 1,000 years. This was incredible magic. Twilight couldn't even imagine the scope of these forces without collecting the last element. She could see the progress of this epic battle. Celestia was losing the battle. Twilight refocused her attention to the matter at hand. If not Luna, then who? "Hello, Twilight." The voice came from behind her, and above. Twilight sighed morosely. "Hello, Spike." Dragons. Dragons were powerful in the use of magic, and this one had access to her personal library for years. Who knew what he could have learned in the time he had left her? Magic was the only explanation for how he had been able to sneak up behind her. She began to walk forward, slowly. No sudden movements, not when an angry dragon was staring you down from behind. She slowly turned to look at her new adversary. Taking him in took longer than she expected. He was huge, fully grown now. Even his snout was several times larger than her whole body. Half of him was still hidden behind the forest. Only his eyes reminded her of the Spike she once knew. "How long did you know?" "I suspected since Rainbow Dash. I helped you make those horseshoes, remember? They would have resisted any natural lightning bolt. I knew after Applejack. There's no way you would have let them die under your watch, Twilight. Not if you really wanted to help them." "Why didn't you try to stop me earlier?" "I didn't have the strength. You were always more powerful than me. I tried to tell Pinky, but she thought I was joking. I tried to tell Rarity, but she would never listen to me. Rarity never listened to me. Fluttershy listened to me. We've been planning this for years. I went to the Dragon Homelands to learn more magic. We knew when you'd strike, and now we're ready." Keep them talking, Twilight thought to herself. Get ready. "And just what did you learn in the Dragon Homelands, Spike?" "I learned how to kill you." With a flash, Twilight charged her horn and sent a blast of energy directly at Fluttershy. It was the same spell she had used on Dash, only far more powerful. The little pony had been prepared. She launched herself into the air with a quickness that belied her age. Spike breathed at the same time. Twilight teleported to safety a split second ahead of the blast. A great wave of heat rolled over her, singeing the tips of her hairs. She had teleported well out of the way of Spike's breath, yet the heat was still overpowering. It hurt her eyes to look at it. A great green-white blaze scorched the spot she had been standing on. It bounced, arching up into the trees beyond. The sap in the first line of trees flashed into steam, exploding them into a million splinters. The trees beyond them simply burst into flame. Twilight couldn't see how far into the forest Spike's breath had traveled. There is a great smoldering ditch blasted out of the courtyard where she had been standing seconds earlier. Fluttershy had come to ground on the other side. Whether it was because she was conserving her energy or because she too had been stunned by the dragon's attack, Twilight didn't know. She took the opportunity. Twilight teleported behind Fluttershy. Again, Fluttershy was ready for it. She kicked with both hind legs. Twilight was forced to duck. Fluttershy leapt away. Again, Twilight teleported to safety. Spike's massive tail smashed down upon the courtyard where Twilight had just been standing. Dirt and cobblestones were thrown into the air. Another groove, smaller than the first, now crossed the courtyard. There was another pause. They sized each other up. Twilight, Fluttershy, and Spike stood staring at each other, each at the point of an equilateral triangle. It was an interesting problem, Twilight thought to herself. She could kill the dragon outright, but that would take time. Fluttershy would escape. She could kill Fluttershy, and that would be quick, but she'd leave herself exposed to an attack from the dragon. On the other hoof, if she killed Fluttershy, she would collect the last element. She would be immortal. Why worry about a dragon if you're immortal? She made her move. She aimed for Fluttershy. Again, Fluttershy dodged the attack, and Spike responded with his tail a split second after Twilight teleported to safety. Again, Fluttershy dodged another attack. That pony wouldn't stay still. Spike tried his claws. They raked through empty space. Again, Twilight blasted at Fluttershy, and again she dodged. She teleported to safety. Spike hadn't attacked that time. Where was Spike? He was right behind her. He had anticipated her move. Spike lunged at her, opening his wide maw to snap down on her. A killing stroke. Twilight flinched. Not now, not like this. She readied another teleport. Spike's jaws snapped down with a crash, inches from her face.
There was a flash and a bang, like an explosion this time, as Twilight teleported away. She found herself 40 feet in the air above the courtyard. A botched teleport. She was falling. Fluttershy was there. To catch her? No, Fluttershy was kicking, both hind legs. The kick shattered Twilight's ribs and sent her breath from her lungs, sending her flying back up into the air. She fell again, all the way to the courtyard below. She didn't scream as she fell. She landed badly, horribly. Her hind leg was broken and twisted at an awful angle. Pain shot up her spine. This pain was matched by an equal coming from just above her forehead. Blood was pouring down her face, stinging her eyes. It was over, Twilight thought. She had been defeated. She had to teleport away, plan again. She tried to teleport, but her magic failed her. She looked up above her at a new, terrifying spectacle. Spike was swinging his neck back and forth with a horrible, muffled roar. Spike was hurt, and badly. Blood was pouring from his mouth. Blood sprayed in great red mists as he bellowed. Twilight looked closer. White objects were falling from Spike's mouth. They were his fangs. Those fangs could crunch diamonds like they were carrots, and the force of the explosion had shattered them. Twilight saw a new object fall from his mouth then. It looked like a fang, but it was smaller. A helical groove ran its length. It was purple. It was Twilight's horn. Spike had bitten off her horn. Twilight despaired. Spike's roars quieted. He calmed himself. Twilight heard the clopping of approaching hooves. She tried to turn to look at Fluttershy. You always underestimated me, Twilight. I was only ever a shrinking violet to you. You mistook meekness for weakness. That's the way they all thought of me. Don't play games on Fluttershy. She's too sensitive. Don't bring Fluttershy along. She's too afraid. Fluttershy, please. Please don't hurt me anymore. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything I've done. Twilight, in all those books you've ever read, did you ever read anything about the herds of ponies that live in the Everfree fields? The ones that call themselves the last free ponies? Twilight tried to collect her thoughts. The last free ponies? Yes, they're wild ponies. They don't live in houses or read books. They eat wild grass. They're completely uncivilized. They're barbarians. Barbarians? Fluttershy was amused. Yes, I suppose they are barbarians. Now, Twilight, do you know what those barbarians do to poor lame ponies who have broken a leg? No! No, please! Don't worry, Twilight. They consider it a form of kindness. Fluttershy reared back above Twilight. She neighed. It wasn't her gentle whinnying, but a wild, high-pitched neigh. It screamed with a primal force. 4 other voices added themselves to that neigh. It screamed with revenge. She brought all her weight down, all of her force concentrated into her leading hoof. She brought her hoof down on top of Twilight's crying head. It was not, she thought to herself afterward, it was not all that much different from crushing an apple. She walked away from the body. She walked out of range, and then nodded to Spike. Spike took the cue. He had been watching patiently. Spike had his own issues to resolve with Twilight. Spike inhaled, deeper than he had earlier. He exhaled. It was hotter than before, blue-white this time. Twilight's ruined corpse was instantly vaporized. The wall behind her body was razed. The old palace behind that, reduced to rubble. When Spike's vision returned, he looked to Fluttershy. Her eyes had begun to milk over. They turned to white completely, and then began to glow. Her frame rose up above the courtyard without her wings flapping. Spike turned away. There was going to be another light show, and Spike had seen enough light shows. Spike watched the reflections flicker on the leaves of the trees like strobes. The lights crescendoed, then stopped. "Spike," came a voice behind him. Spike snaked his head around to look. Fluttershy was before him. She had been restored to her youth, appearing the same as when he had met her many years ago, except for a crown beset with 6-colored jewels resting on her head. "Let me take a look at your mouth." Spike opened his aching maw wide. "Yes, I can fix this for you. I can fix it right now." She used her magic. "How?"
Spike had taught her the nature of magic, but she couldn't actually use it without a horn. The pain flowed away from him. She had changed again from just a moment before. A small nub of a horn had appeared just above her forehead. She continued to change as he watched. She grew. 6 feet, 7, 8. Her wings stretched out and grew as well. Hers were no longer the small, improbable wings of a songbird, but the mighty wings of a giant eagle. The new horn continued to grow, stretching out over 3 feet in ominous lengths. And the hair of her mane and tail was no longer hair. They were waves of coherent light, discrete bands of pink in different shades and hues that waved perpetually in an unfelt wind. She strolled around his maw, lay down beside him, and rested her head on his.
I'm so tired, Spike.
Do I call you Princess Fluttershy now?
I don't think you should call me Fluttershy at all. I don't feel like Fluttershy. Fluttershy was the paragon of kindness. I still possess that element, still intact. I have all the other elements too. But I don't feel kind. I don't feel loyal or honest. I certainly don't feel like laughing. They thought quietly to themselves for a moment. Spike.
Yes?
Thank you for taking care of the animals for me. I just couldn't do that myself.
I've done worse. Still, I say you took an awful risk. If Twilight had seen through your bluff, if she had known your element was still intact, she would have tried to sever it. I would have to take you out myself before that happened. I'm glad I didn't have to do that. You were the only friend I have left. Spike focused his attention in the direction of Canterlot. Is the other battle finished? Is it decided? I can't see it anymore. Fluttershy followed his gaze. She could still see it. She could see everything.
It's a draw, Spike. They're still fighting, but that battle will never be decided. They're too evenly matched. Each makes gains on the other, only to lose them. It's in their destiny.
You could put a stop to it.
I could, Spike. They've only weakened themselves, Luna and Celestia. I could march in and destroy them, or enslave them, make them swear fealty, bend them to my will. But why, Spike? I don't want to rule Equestria. I didn't want any of this power. I only did this to stop Twilight. I'm no princess. I hardly even like other ponies. All I've ever wanted to do is live in my own little house in the country and take care of animals. I just want to go home, Spike. But I can't even go home now. Not with what's waiting for me there.
Let's build a new home then, Fluttershy. Somewhere far away from Canterlot or Ponyville or the Everfree Forest. Somewhere in the wilds with plenty of animals. Something with a large front door. It will give us time enough to think at least. It will be a place where we can pick up the pieces.
Fluttershy looked around at the rubble before her. All right, Spike. Let's find someplace new. I'm done here.